We're now going to go through 3 powerful techniques plus a couple of bonus ones to overcome the challenges of foreshortening, and Maiko's going to demonstrate them. Hi, my name's Kenzo and this is Love Life Drawing. In the last video we saw that foreshortening itself isn't the problem. In fact, we draw foreshortened objects all the time and we're happy with all sorts of foreshortening in the figure. The issue is that there are some angles that we're used to seeing the body from and some that we aren't. When we're presented with an angle that we're not used to, our brains want to draw it like we're viewing it from an angle that we are used to. Now, as we go through these techniques, I don't want to be too prescriptive about exactly how you should tackle a foreshortened pose or body part. Your approach doesn't need to be formulaic. Instead, as you practice and become familiar with the different methods, you can use each whenever it's going to be useful. Because, remember that all these techniques are not the correct way to do things. You don't need to put techniques from tutorials on a pedestal above yourself. These are tools you use to help yourself. So just grab whichever tool's needed for the job at hand. So this is a super powerful method, and really you're seeing alignments and checking angles all the time in drawing. You're constantly checking how each point lines up to the next point you're drawing. This fingertip lines up with the top of her thumb and then even with her mouth. But to help make things even clearer, sometimes it's useful to check alignments by holding up your pencil or something straight and seeing how things align that way. One thing Maiko does is to lightly draw the big shapes of the figure, which she thinks she can establish quite easily, the bits that present fewer headaches for her. And then with that context in place, she can use those established parts to start to draw the more tricky parts using alignments. Notice here that she's actually drawn the lines of alignment onto the drawing, and that helps her to map out her drawing better. If you don't want to add these mapping lines, you can even just sort of air draw them without making marks on the page. Move your hand over the paper as if you were adding these lines, but don't actually make the marks. That way your mind's eye can see the mapping and the paper is untouched. When drawing a live model rather than a photo, the pose might shift a bit, especially the longer poses. The model's muscles get tired and naturally things can move, angles can change. If that happens, you have to choose: either stick with your original structural marks or move all your structural lines as the model moves. Usually, unless there's something actually wrong with them, we like to stick with what we drew early in the drawing for the structure. You can usually still see all the information you need to add the further layers, even if some of the angles have changed. Let's forget the figure and see some simple shapes. We aren't talking about a standard formula. We aren't saying always draw this part with a circle and that part of the body like a cylinder. And those approaches are useful too, but we think it's a good skill to be flexible. So for your initial layers, see the simple 2D shapes that the pose viewed from the angle you're viewing it from creates. So here you might notice this triangle shape and start your drawing from there. We're seeing and drawing a triangle, so our brains are not thinking about figures. That way, you're not going to give in to the habit that your brain has to draw the figure as if it's viewing it straight on. Keep this layer very light. Try to keep the angles and relative sizes roughly right. You can use measurement methods to check the angles and lengths if you like, but ideally you'll only need to use those when you're really unsure. And as is often the case, it's best to go for the big simple shapes in your initial layers. Shapes that capture big chunks of the pose. You can add smaller elements later on. When it comes time to add layers with the actual figure, your brain might start to doubt your shapes. It really wants to straighten the figure out and starts to tell you this is all wrong. You'll be ready for that. Before we go on, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button and let us know what you think of this video with a comment. We really enjoy reading all of your comments. and also check out our newsletter and the Life Drawing Success Guide over at lovelifedrawing.com. We have preconceptions about the human figure, but none about the negative space that the figure creates. So drawing those shapes is a great way to trick our brains into drawing the reality rather than its bad habits of drawing its own preconceptions. So with these legs, there's all sorts of subtle foreshortening going on. Look at how short this part is becoming compared to that part. Our brains are screaming at us, but they're supposed to be the same length. Your eyes can fight back, and they're arguing with each other. Alternatively, if you look at the negative space, your brain doesn't have an opinion on that. So finally, they can agree on something. Now, just this tiny bit of negative space here under the model's crotch was really helpful in getting this drawing right. So some extra useful methods: measuring. The old measurement technique that we went through in lesson 7 of our beginner figure drawing series, which you can find here on YouTube. I won't explain the process here because it's explained in that video already, but basically we're going to compare the length of one part of the figure to another by holding out our pencil to see these lengths. We're going to have a fully stretched out arm. And I would use this when you're really unsure of something, when you need help. Sometimes you can get obsessed with everything, with getting everything just right, and do this too much, and the whole drawing becomes really analytical and overworked. Let your eye do most of the measurements intuitively. See the figure as a landscape or as abstract shapes. See the simple shapes in the figure. Use some alignments, and then when you're really struggling, you can force things to be right with this method. Now, this method is one I learned from a Croquis Cafe technique video, and I'm sure other people teach it too, but I learned it from there and I really liked the way that they presented it. Their technique videos are great because they're so short and sweet, so I'm going to link to that video below. I find this method useful for limbs and figures, especially from angles where those joints can be thought of as quite spherical. So it basically involves drawing a circle at the point each joint is, and then adding lines to create a 3D cylindrical volume, and then finally, with that structure in place, drawing the contours and tones of that body part. Okay, so in the last part of this series, we're going to be doing this, so definitely check that out. Thank you guys so much for watching.